everyone, I'm Miss Lydia from the Boston Library. Thank you for joining me for our craft project today. We're going to be making some more artwork today. We're going to be using birds as our inspiration, but you can really use any different type of design motif that you'd like with these two techniques. For our first technique, we're going to need a canvas board or regular canvas. You can use any size that you like. We're also going to need a variety of buttons and sequins. So you want lots of different options and sizes and colors depending on what type of bird you're going to use. You'll need a template of some sort, some hot glue, and depending again on what type of design you want to use, you might want some paints. So I chose a swan for my bird. I have lots of white buttons, so that's going to work perfectly. But since I'm using white buttons to create my bird design, I'm going to actually coat my canvas first. So I'm going to mix up some colors so that I can create a bit of a sky background and then some water down at the bottom. So I'm going to start by putting a little bit of my dark blue down at the bottom. And I'm going to add just a little bit of a lighter blue in there to create a bit of a ripple through that water as well. And then I'm going to mix up a much lighter blue by adding in a good amount of white and mixing that up for my sky. Once I have my lighter blue mixed up, I'm going to cover the rest of my canvas with that color. You want to make sure that you get around the edges of your canvas too. Unless you're framing it, and then you don't have to worry about that too much. While this is drying, I'm just going to slide it out of the way. It shouldn't take too long to dry since it is acrylic paint and there's just a very thin layer on the top of that canvas. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to prepare my template. So I've chosen a swan. You want to choose whatever design you're using for some clear lines. So you don't want anything that's too intricate. You have to envision filling the entire space in with buttons and sequins, kind of a mixture. So you want to make sure that you can make those shapes fit into the contours of your design. The other thing I can do while my paint is drying is to start separating out my supplies. So I have a big thing of sequins, various different sizes and colors, and a giant thing of buttons. You don't need nearly this many buttons. I did kind of take the easy way out. So choosing the swan, I'm going to be using mostly white and silver as my base colors. So I'm going to just start trying to separate out some white buttons in a variety of sizes. They don't all have to match by any means. So you do want some variation in there, and then you're going to want to try to find as many of those white and silver sequins as you can to fill in the smaller spaces. I've gathered an assortment of buttons and sequins and some other little shapes that I found in my button bucket. So you can use basically anything that you have on hand that is fairly flat that you want to incorporate into your design. It's helpful if you have your template in front of you to start kind of mocking it out so you have an idea of what you need. Obviously you can always grab more, but it is helpful to kind of visualize how you're going to lay everything down first. I don't have a sequin that's going to work well for the beak, so I actually found one large one here that I'm going to use, and I'm going to trace out the beak and then cut it out in this shape. And then I know that will fit exactly over top of that space that I need to fill. So now that I have all of my supplies gathered and my paint is dry, I'm going to take my template and I'm going to glue it down. You can use regular Elmer's glue, Mod Podge. You could use the hot glue, but you might get a little bit of lumpiness in it that you don't want. So I'm going to use my Mod Podge for this. So I'm again using my foam brush, and I'm going to put just a light coat of Mod Podge on the back of my template so that I can secure it to my canvas. You want to make sure you cover out to the edges so that nothing curls up on you. And then I'm going to place that right on my canvas so that my swan is on top of my water. And you're going to want to give that just a little bit of time to dry as well. Your next step is to just start gluing your items on. Hot glue is the easiest. It will hold the best and work the fastest, but you do have to be careful, especially with the sequins, but anything that you're placing on here that's small, because it is fairly easy to burn yourself, so be careful. My recommendation would be to choose your larger pieces first. So like I have this little plastic tree that I'm going to use, that's going to go right in the center. It'll be easier to work my way around that than to piece it in later. And then you can just continue to place items. Make sure you don't put all of your buttons in one place, all the sequins in another. It is helpful because the sequins lay flatter to place them first. So stagger them a bit with your buttons. They're easier to tuck underneath, and that way you get better coverage over your design. It can be helpful to work along a single line. So right now I'm starting with my bottom line and kind of trying to go all the way across the bottom, and then I'll start to stagger in above that so that it doesn't get too stripy. Also, if you're using a lot of the same buttons, so I have a lot of the same white button here, you want to vary whether they're facing up or down. That'll give you, again, a different texture. So one has a ridge around the outside and the other one is smooth. It'll give you a little bit more variation. Now that I've finished placing all of my buttons and sequins, you can see I have a very sparkly swan here. You are going to have to spend some time cleaning up some of the glue strands, because the way that we glue these down, you get a lot of those strands of hot glue. So it does take a little bit to clean that all off. Also remember, you can cut the sequins to fit. So if you end up with some odd spaces, feel free to cut them so that they will fit into those. And you can also, if you're careful, you can pull buttons off and move them. So if you end up with a space that you just can't fill, or that leaves you with an awkward gap, you can pick those back up and replace them. Just really be careful that you don't pull up your template as well. So there's our finished swan. Our second design is going to, again, use a canvas or canvas board. But this time we're going to be using some book pages. You could also use maps or possibly sheet music, any kind of decorative paper. And you can use a whole sheet. If you don't want to rip it, you can just place one single sheet down like that. It makes for a much simpler project. But what I'm going to do is actually take these pages and rip them and scatter them about. So I have some old dictionary pages that I'm using, and I'm going to rip them into random sized sheets. I'm going to get rid of any of the empty margin pieces as well. You want to stick with something that is fairly simple. So you want something that has a small print, no illustrations. You don't want anything that's going to distract from the design that we're going to place on top. So once you have a big stack of ripped book pages here, you're going to take your canvas and you're going to put down a good solid layer of Mod Podge. It's helpful when you do this step to raise your canvas off of your work surface. Once I have my Mod Podge done, I'm just going to start placing my paper on top. So you can get down kind of a scattered first layer, and then you're going to add some more Mod Podge. You can wrap this around the sides depending on how you want the edges of your canvas to look, or you can just try to line it up fairly closely. Once you have a first layer down, it's going to look fairly patchy. You're going to gently go over top of that with another coat of Mod Podge. Mainly filling in those spaces. So where I still have white, I'm going to kind of go around a border, and then I'll place down another piece over top of that. You can layer this as much as you want, but when you're done, you should have a completely covered canvas. You may get a little bit of ripples. They usually flatten out as long as they're not too severe as your Mod Podge dries. So on this design, I'm going to use a bird template that I have. You could print off anything. You could cut something out of a magazine. You can draw something. It can be colored or black and white, so whatever type of a look you want to go for. And then you have to figure out what orientation you want. So you might want to kind of turn your canvas around and try to figure out where you want that design. Once you figure that out, since my Mod Podge is still just a little bit damp, I'm going to push them right down into those pages. And I'm going to go around all the edges to make sure that everything is down tight. I'm also going to add a couple of leaves into this design, just to kind of set off the bird a little bit more in the center. Once I have my designs placed down, I'm also going to go gently over top of those with a little bit more of the Mod Podge. Depending on how carefully sealed up this is, you may need to apply another coat of Mod Podge, but you want to wait until that dries to see how it looks before you do that. I'm also going to do one with just a single sheet. So here I have a piece of, again, dictionary paper that's just a little bit bigger than my canvas, and I'm going to lay down a thin coat of Mod Podge here again. And then I'm going to place that page down. And you want to try to really smooth this out so that you don't get any bubbles in it. Once that's all smoothed out, you can either cut off the edges or you can wrap them around the back and glue them there. Then I'm going to flip that upright and choose my design. So I have these birds on a wire that I'm going to use. I'm going to cut out just the bird silhouette, so I have to figure out how many birds I can fit across. And I'm going to actually draw the wire on. So I'm going to find a point a little bit more than halfway down, and I'm going to take a Sharpie. I'm going to try to make sure that I'm even across. Hold that down and draw my wire. Once I have my bird silhouettes cut out, I'm going to Mod Podge them down again very gently. This time I'm using a matte Mod Podge, and I'm just going to put it on the underside and try to get them sealed down as tightly as possible with that, because I don't want the gloss finish across the top. Once my silhouettes are all placed down, there's what the final design will look like. You can, of course, put a coat of Mod Podge over top of that if you want that glossier finish. I think it looks better with a little bit of matte finish on this particular design, so I'm going to leave it like that. Here you can see our finished bird artwork. This one still has a little bit of Mod Podge drying, so it's a little hard to see the design. We have our silhouette here and our button artwork with our little sequins in the middle. Remember, you can use these same techniques with any design that you like. So the simpler you keep the lines, the more impact it'll have, the easier it'll be to fill in with your buttons, the easier it'll be to cut anything out.